And that starts to get you into the notion of Big Bangness, and because the big question people had, well, what happened before the Big Bang? And the answer is there was no space, there was no time. That sounds a lot like light to me. So in the beginning there was light, and the light is what started to pour forth. And so where does mind come into all this? Well, that's maybe a bit of a tricky question. I'm not sure how to quite answer that in terms of just light itself, except that there is certain hints which come to me from looking at the Kabbalah, the Hebrew alphabet, which gives me some hint between light and consciousness. And one of the first formations from that concept is that the thing which I think tells you that you're conscious is your ability to make words. It doesn't mean, it's not this thing which you feel as consciousness, but you can tell yourself you're conscious when you mention a word, when you say a word, because consciousness and words seem to be very much integrated together. And this is what I kind of play with a little bit. I don't quite have this totally grasped.
Well, consciousness is a great mystery, yeah, and yet it's something that we all experience intimately, and typically we associate our consciousness with our body. That may be the first illusion.
It may be. The best that I've come up with is that there is a field of consciousness which is beyond space and time. It is not. It manifests itself in space and time, just like light manifests in space and time, but it itself is beyond space and time. Consciousness is beyond space and time, but it manifests within space and time. In other words, just as light appears to slow down and be material, for example, lasers have an impact, they appear to have mass in some sense, consciousness appears as the movement in some way of the material substances upon which consciousness arises within. So there's consciousness in all things to some extent.
Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Now, Einstein combined space and time into the notion of space-time.
Right.
And the notion of space-time is I gather that Einstein really meant is that the past doesn't really disappear. It's there in space-time. One can pinpoint it.
Yes.
And in a sense, the future, even though it hasn't happened yet, also exists in space-time. It can be pinpointed as well.
Yes, yes. That was called in the vernacular of the physicists. They call that the block universe. It's a block of space-time. One of its dimensions is space, and the other dimension is time. And so events are points within space and time. And when you look at how relativity talks about that, you can see that from different observers' point of view, space and time can differ in terms of what is considered to be past and what is considered to be future and what is considered to be present. What is considered to be present from one observer's point of view, that is what is now, so to speak, from another observer's point of view, could be series of events going off into the future or a series of events going off into the past. So there is no absolute nowness. Now is dependent on what you consider to be your space-time coordination, how fast you're moving relative to somebody else.
As I recall, Einstein once wrote a letter of condolence to the wife of a colleague, another physicist, and in it he wrote to her that few people would understand this. He said, but your husband and I would understand that there is a sense in which he's still here. His life hasn't ended with his death.
Huh, I hadn't heard that, but
because he still exists, I think, in this space-time matrix.
Yes. if you're into the block theory and you hold to it as being that way, then all events that have passed are still back there, and if they are, it's possible we should be able to time travel and get to them. And if all events in the future are, from our point of view, yet to be, but if they're there yet to be, we should be able to travel to the future and get to them, and we should be able to find some mechanical way, some physical way, some way of doing that, and that gave notion to the whole idea that time travel.
And there
Why
are many
not?
physicists who take time travel quite seriously.
Very seriously, and even Stephen Hawking, who doesn't take these types of wilder ideas too seriously, does say, well, you can definitely time travel to the future. We're doing that right now. And he knew about relativity theory, and he knew that if you travel on a rocket ship and you go off, say at 0.999 the speed of light, which is not possible, but let's say you did that, not possible engineering wise, you don't have the energy to do that, and you went off to say Alpha Centauri, which is say 4 light years away, and then came back to Earth, as far as we were concerned, moving at that speed, you'd be gone 4 years out and 4 years back. We would all have aged 8 years.
Yes.
But people on the rocket ship wouldn't have aged more than a few minutes. And they would just think it boop, boop, and they're back. And they would then have essentially time traveled into the future. One of the movies that was made called Planet of the Apes is essentially that